Welcome to the Natural Living Development Podcast Show, where you will learn about natural building, natural living, and inspiring real estate developments from around the world. The goal of this podcast is to educate people that wish to make a difference with their investment and bring a positive change for the world. It's an opportunity to re-envision what real estate development should look like and how these developments should be funded. For more information about our natural living developments, please visit naturallivingdevelopments.com. We hope you enjoy the show. All right. Well, welcome back. Today we have Ray Clamons with us. He's owner of Natural Building Works. Ray, thank you so much for being with us today. And why don't we start with getting a little bit of background about you, what you do, and how you got into it.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Ray Clamons, and thanks for having me on this podcast. This is great. This is my first podcast, so I'm super excited to be here.
Nice.
And yeah, so my company is Natural Building Works. We are in Tucson, Arizona, and we've been doing work in Tucson and the surrounding areas for about 5 years now. We really specialize in rammed earth and straw bale, but we'll also do earth bag. We'll do plasters. The real goal is high efficiency and low carbon buildings and landscapes.
Nice. And then how did you get into natural building? How long ago was this when you started?
I think I've always been kind of into it. I could say, like, how do you get into it naturally? I think most of us as kids have this tendency to play with it and play in the dirt and then get kind of taken away from it somehow through our as we grow up. But for me, I think growing up with hippies as parents helped me kind of go in this direction. There's one class in architecture school at the U of A, Larry Medlin, his class was like alternative building methods. So it was showing us the passive solar buildings in New Mexico and across the world. And that really resonated with me. And then, in our 5th year of architecture, we built a rammed earth house in the design build class. And that was really where it really dug in. And natural building became the thing that I wanted to do. And I think from there it just grew, from there it started as rammed earth, but not really natural building. And then I really found the whole natural building world at some point, which has, there's so many more pieces to it than just rammed earth.
Right. So that's really interesting because a lot of architects don't get that kind of experience or knowledge about natural building. And just for those people who are listening, let's start a little bit backwards. Tell us what natural building is to you, or what does that mean when we say the word natural building?
Yeah, natural building, I think there's plenty of different ways to talk about it. But for me, it's kind of using building materials that have been processed very little. So using building materials like wood, like soil, and bamboo is on that list. I think hemp is on that list. So these things, they don't go through a massive heat, beat, and treat kind of procedure to become the materials that then you buy off the shelf. These things can really come out of the landscape. Without all of that process that comes with it, energy and the embodied carbon component of that. So these natural materials have a low embodied carbon, they have a low toxicity just inherently.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And so you said when you were in school, you started you got into rammed earth. So let's explain to the audience a little bit what is rammed earth.
Yeah, rammed earth it's basically earth that's compressed into a form. You boil it down to kind of 3 things. It's earth, it's a form, and it's compressed. And it's kind of like, if we think about it kind of like in a concrete way, like concrete as a building material. You build a form, you pour concrete into it, you pull the form, and now you have a wall. So rammed earth is, way older than concrete is, and people have been doing this for a long time. Great Wall of China has pieces of it that are built out of rammed earth. And so it's basically, in its simplest form, a box full of dirt.
I think just so not to confuse the audience, because it's not like you can go out and put topsoil and pack it in tight. So let's get a little bit specific. What exact materials are in the rammed earth? What are you
Sure.
packing in there?
Yeah, there's a whole suitable soil component of rammed earth. So there's a lot of, I get this question a lot. Can I use my soil? And the answer is usually no. But there's a way to understand the soil where you can mix your soil with more clay or more sand or more gravel and get it to a point where it is suitable. And there are soils that you can buy out of a landscape yard. If you buy quarter minus or limestone trailings and add cement to that at like a 3 to 7% ratio, then you can use that as your rammed earth mix. There's other ways to take the screen fill and add gravel and sand to that, and some Portland cement, and just you can use that in a really simple way. It doesn't have to be as complicated.
Is there like a particular formula, let's say in your area for your soil, or like how much cement, how much clay, how much aggregate?
Yeah, I mean, this is where it starts to get complicated, right? This is the question, the question that's really difficult to answer, and that none of the books really explain it really simply, because it's really about testing your soil and understanding your granular, distribution, your clay distribution. But I guess if I could put it simply, there's also stabilized rammed earth, which is Portland cement stabilized or lime stabilized, and there's two different paths down that, and then there's raw earth. If you want to talk about raw earth, and the clay content is part of this. Raw earth, you want to push your clay content up to 30-40%, and stabilized earth, you want to push your clay content down to 10-12%. The stabilizers, especially Portland cement and clay, they don't really work together. They kind of try to do the same job and fight each other. So raw earth, more clay; stabilized earth, less clay.
Okay, well, that's great. And obviously, I think the main point here for the audience is to get, if you are going to play with this building method, is to test it, right? To kind of, and then what would you recommend? Say like a small 4x whatever thickness that you want the wall, but then would you put any kind of compression? Are you putting any rebar in the wall? What are you doing for tensile strength?
Yeah, and it depends what part of the country or what part of the world you're in, and your seismic activity is really key. We're talking about rebar. Here in Arizona, our seismic zone is 0 earthquakes, right? In California, you're going to have more earthquakes. And any other place, you got more earthquakes, you got more rebar. And this is also talking about stabilized rammed earth. And I'll just continue talking about stabilized rammed earth. Is what I know more than unstabilized or raw earth. So in the stabilized world, the more earthquakes, the more rebar. In Arizona here, we're not using any rebar. And we're kind of lucky because it makes it easier to tamp. Once you got that rebar in there, it's more effort to tamp around the rebar and all that.
And have you done with rebar, obviously? Have you used it before?
I haven't personally. I haven't
because you don't have to do it there.
Yeah,
I was wondering.
You don't have to do it. You don't have to.
Yeah, I was just wondering in terms of if you're having horizontal, just every 2 feet or every 18 inches, and also are you needing to have verticals? Do you know that answer? And say in California where I am.
Yeah, in the seismic zones, there's a vertical. What I've seen is vertical rebar
And
Um,
horizontal or just vertical?
I haven't really seen the horizontal, but
Okay.
it's really important to work with a structural engineer at that point or an architect in your area that knows the seismic and rebar um, requirements.
Hmm.
So make sure you're doing it right. And when there is an earthquake, your wall doesn't fall down.
Absolutely. That's a great recommendation. Definitely check with your engineer for sure. So
Mhm.
you came out of architecture school. Did you immediately start the natural building works, or did you take a different avenue before you started the company?
Yeah, when I came out of school, I was still really green, but I really had this desire to continue to build with rammed earth. Um, and I just kind of took whatever job I could get out of school and work there for 5 years. It was a design build firm. And, you know, I learned a lot. I learned a lot there, but they weren't really pushing any kind of sustainability measures or anything in the direction I was looking to go. So at some point, the recession hit 2008, 2009, and I left that firm and started working on my own, working towards sustainable buildings. I started my own Ray Clamons design. Um, then after an internship at Earthship, 2012, I really got the deeper understanding and the bug of natural building and
Mhm,
building with like-minded people in a workshop setting. So
mhm,
started a business, Xylon Designs, which Xylon is my middle name.
mhm.
So it was it was what I wanted to do and going in the right direction in the sustainability world. But really, 4 or 5 years into that, I went to another workshop from a friend of mine from Earthship um, in the Lake Tahoe, Truckee area up
Mhm.
there in Northern California.
Yeah.
And after that, I really got more interested in how do we do this for real as a builder and not just a designer.
Mhm.
Where Xylon Designs was really a more design and permit oriented kind of architecture company. But yeah, 2016, I started Natural Building Works, stepped out to say I can build this stuff, and then things really started
Mhm.
picking up speed to where we are today, 5 years later, and we're really building multiple projects at once and full size houses and things like that.
Nice. And tell us a little bit about kind of how your crew works. Do you employ professional licensed contract builders, or is it just you and a team of volunteers and workshoppers? How does that work?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different ways that we work. Um, there's a few ways where customers can come to me and I can do some consulting work with them. I can help with design and permits. And then from there, they can hire me and my crew to uh, build it for them or build it with them. Or you can kind of hire me as a consultant and build it yourself. Um, and then I can come in at certain points and we can do workshops with you.
Mhm.
Um, if it's a lot of the workshops people are most interested in are plasters and rammed earth and straw stacking, um, not so much the framing component or the foundation part, which are really important parts, but the volunteer effort uh, doesn't it's not as attractive, I think.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, we'll also do earth and floors as a volunteer effort. um, yeah, and working on doing workshops that are a little more in depth on the rammed earth part or the plaster part. So you get a few days worth of rammed earth experience.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, in one shot.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned you also do straw bale. So tell us a little bit about that process. Are you doing load bearing straw bale, or are you doing infill?
Mhm. Yeah, and we're doing both. We have 3 load-bearing straw bale houses going up. And yeah, to I think answer your question a little bit on the last one is we do contract with general contractors
Hmm.
when the house is big enough or too big for us to handle.
Hmm.
we'll handle stuff that's like up to 30 by 30 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then above that, we'll hire out a general contractor that is interested in natural building or experienced in natural building. And so we have one house that's kind of three houses, a garage, a house, and a guest house. That's 3,000 square feet or something. That's general contractor built.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one, 1,200 square feet, that is owner built. I guess one more that's owner built, that's about 950 square feet. These are all, load bearing straw bale. And the latest project we're working on right now, it's the Cole's cabin in Elfrida, Arizona. And this one is an infill. So it's stick frame 2x6s on 24 on center. And then we're going to fill those cavities with straw bales standing on end.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're just going to see how the different types, work differently.
Yeah.
Kind of
Go ahead.
kind of depends on who the lead builder is for us. On the Cole's cabin in Elfrida, the lead builder, he's my friend Jared from Earthship, where we met at Earthship, and he runs his own company now out of Reno area, and he's experienced framer. So we took it that direction. Okay, you frame this up,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll use straws or insulation as our carbon sink, to make it easier for him to build.
Mm-hmm.
And not put him through that learning curve of building load-bearing straw bale
Mm-hmm.
on this really remote project in a really short time frame. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So I have a couple questions. I think just for the audience to understand a little bit of the jargon that we're talking here, stick frame basically just means you're using conventional lumber that you would find like at Home Depot or any other place where it's just 2x6, and then you're framing it like you would a regular house, and then you're infilling it with straw bales on end, which basically means the straw bale size is somewhere between 24-inch to 48-inch, and then the thickness varies between 14 to 16-inch. So you kind of pop it in there and it fits really nice and snug. And load bearing is basically you're not using any framing, you're just putting the bales on top of each other, you're pinning them some way. The engineer usually will tell you how they want it to be pinned, and then your roof or your load bearing gets compressed. How do you compress your bales for load bearing straw bales?
we've done two different types, and also what we're doing is kind of a hybrid load-bearing system where our windows are, they're framed out with 2x6s, instead of conventional or traditional load-bearing straw where you kind of put a wood box and you have bales on top, no bottom. So, we're doing this hybrid, and we've done both ways with to compress our bales, using threaded rods that are embedded in the concrete, and they're external pins, and then we kind of pull the box beam down to compress it with all thread, and that works great. There were some things that we wanted to try with that plaster detail at the top that I wasn't so happy with, using the threaded rod, and so we tried using straps on the latest house, and so we have polyester straps around the top of the box beam down to underneath the bottom of the base plate, and that pulls together and squeezes those bales super tight. And we're pretty happy with the way that was working out. It did still take a while to do. It wasn't necessarily faster, and it wasn't necessarily cheaper either, but I feel like it solved the plaster detail that I was having a problem with.
Yeah, there's always these little tiny details that you don't really think about until the end, and you're like, oh yeah, next time I'm going to do this. In terms of the strapping, how far apart were your straps? Every 2 feet, every 3 feet, every 4 feet?
Yeah, we were doing every 2 feet,
Okay.
and yeah, there's a lot of straps available on the market, and I got some information and encouragement from Timbo Scurso from SolarWise in Colorado, And I saw him on Instagram, he was using these straps. So I asked him about it. He said, yeah, we're using these really heavy duty straps, these polyester ones, purchased at uline.com, instead of the cheaper kind of, and I think they're like a 1,200 pound strap. They're kind of green and they have 1,200 pound capacity, where there's some other ones you can buy on Amazon for a lot cheaper, but they have like a 300 pound capacity. And even the 1,200, we were cranking on them and we popped a couple. So I think it's really important to have those high tensile strength straps.
And then after the straps, do you still have to do a top plate so that you can have your rafter membrane or rafter connection to your walls? Or how do you do your rafter to your walls and load bearing with straps?
We're putting, yeah, since the straps are thin, and I guess that's a plaster detail thing, but we're putting our roof rafters right on top of the box beam.
Okay, so you do a box beam on top of the straps, or the straps
Yeah,
or the straps go through the box beam.
straps are going over the box beam.
Over the box beam. Okay. So that for the audience, again, I'm sorry for all the jargon conversation, but basically what he's describing here is there's a straw bale wall. If you could imagine it all being stacked against each other, then on top is basically a box that's built usually with, depending on what engineer requires, 6x6, 2x6 or 2x8 box that goes basically the same width as the wall, thickness of the wall, and then your straps will go over top of that. So then that brings it a uniform compression, so that you're not just compressing over top of that bale and kind of creating like if you would put a rubber band around a pillow, where you're only compressing the area where the rubber band is. Whereas the box beam is, because it's wood and expanded and it's built structurally to take a load, you can compress it and it helps spread the load across the wall. Is that a good way to explain it?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Well, great. I have a couple more questions. So, in terms of your starting, so this podcast also is, we're going to talking about developments and creating an alternative way of housing for people. As as a builder and architect, that this is not cheap to build these houses. It is worth it,
Right.
absolutely worth it. But the clients who are hiring us to do this are either have the cash or are well to do, so that they can afford to pay us to build these homes. And obviously the goal is to try to make these homes available for everyone, not just the people who can afford us. So we're
Mhm.
trying to, as you and I are both trying to turn this whole building industry upside down, by showing people that there's an alternative way of building. But we're also trying to create buildings for people who want to rent, who don't have the money to be able to build and afford. So tell us a little bit about your cost to build, what what's an average price for a home, and then what's your goals for the future for your company, and how we can make this more accessible for everyone.
Yeah. Um, yeah, when it comes to clients, and I think this is an interesting thing of where natural building works is and where our outreach has gone. But I hear people like you and there's other straw bale builders in town and around Tucson and Arizona that have well-to-do clients that have the money and have the cash and they don't need a loan to do this. But I think somehow in the way that I've put myself out there, I'm getting homeowners that want to build this themselves
Mhm.
with cash, or they need a loan and they don't have enough money in, yeah, in a lot of instances, they don't have enough money to actually make this happen and say, hey, I got $30,000 in a piece of land. Can I build something? Well, you might be able to, but I can't help you. That's not enough.
Mhm.
Um, or I got 120, I got a loan for 120. Can we build this? And even then, and with COVID, um, prices have gone up on everything substantially. So even 120 isn't enough money in Arizona to get 1,000 square feet,
Mhm.
unless you're building every single thing yourself.
Mhm.
And so Yeah, and this is a crazy thing. It costs so much money to do these things. And to build any kind of house, it costs a ton of money. To buy a house might not cost as much money. You know, the real estate market is really crazy now, and everything's going for 100 grand more than it was 2 years ago
Mhm.
in Tucson here. And it's probably even worse in California.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so yeah, there's this whole development side, this whole like real estate market portion of what we're trying to do is make natural building more accessible
Mhm.
to people. And it's a really difficult nut to crack. It's really, really hard. Um, and we're all trying our hardest to make it happen. Um, but yeah, I can say it's really hard. If you're a homeowner out there, or if you're interested in building something natural, you don't have much money, you got to do it yourself. You know, you got to read the books, you got to learn everything you can, and you got to get out there and put the tools on and get out there and make it happen.
Yeah, and then
Go
like
to
go to your workshops, right? I mean,
Mhm.
come volunteer, come, you're obviously your program is giving lots of opportunities for people who want to be able to come out
Mhm.
and practice.
Right, definitely. I think, money's well spent with an architect or an engineer to give you a plan that's going to stand up and pass code and meet code.
Mhm.
But then get out there and build it yourself. If you're able to, if you have some money, I think there are certain portions to hire people to help with the foundation, with the roof, with plumbing, electrical. Those are all really important places where things can go wrong
Mhm.
pretty easily.
Mhm.
Um, and then, yeah, if you do have some money, hire a professional, and we're doing the professionals that are working on this natural building have a really high level of craft and really care about the work. I've worked with a lot of subcontractors recently that just don't care. Um, and it's been a hassle on at least one of our projects to get people to really care about this stuff and take the time and effort and care and quality and devil's in the details kind of thing. Where, yeah, I think people who care about natural building and get into it, they really do care about the planet, care about the people, care about the quality of work, and bring the whole package with them.
Yeah, I think that's really well said.
Mhm.
And I think just to add to what you just said too, that it's not just about helping people understand that this is a viable option in comparison to new construction or conventional construction, but it's really, we also need to start working with our local banks. We need to educate them. If you are interested in natural building, start the conversation. Tell them natural building can be engineered. You can have professional licensed contractors help you build it. You can have architects to design it for you. And really, that's kind of what these banks want. They want some kind of assurance that it's not just going to be you in the backwoods building a little, you know, earth house with an earth shelter that's going to collapse and then it's going to kill everybody inside. And then they're going to be they're held, holding the purse. So it's really an opportunity for us to go out there and help our local banks, because obviously these huge banks are going to be different, but our nonprofit credit union banks are going to be the ones that we can start. And one of the things that we're doing, which might help you as well, is we're working with the local a credit union, and they're basically saying, look, if you build it first, then we can come and refinance it. So that's the other aspect of it. It's like, if you do have some cash, you can borrow from friends and family to get you to the point where the building is finished, then you can go into the bank, refinance it, and then that's kind of like their starting point, right?
Mhm.
And eventually they want to get into more of the lending, the new construction lending side of it. But what's funny is we have to change the terminology. We can't use the word straw bale. We have to use natural fiber insulation. So the underwriters aren't
Right.
like, what is this? So it's yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, for me, this conversation with the banks is just so surprising that it's still this conversation of, well, I don't know if that straw bale house is going to stand up. I can't loan on that. I can't lend you money
Mhm.
for this house that might not stand up, when there's so many examples of straw bale houses still standing,
Mhm.
you know, 40,
Mhm.
50 years down the line. There's examples of straw bale houses standing through a wildfire in
Mhm.
California. And the
Yeah.
straw bale house is the one that survived, not the stick frame house.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't understand why the banks are still so afraid of this kind of building methodology. These methods are in the International Residential Code. They're approved by the entire world that says these buildings work. So why is it that the bankers don't agree yet, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And
And I
actually
haven't
that's
had this conversation with the banker yet, so I don't have an answer. I don't know why
yeah.
they're
And
not
it's fun.
willing.
Yeah, no, it's funny because my background is actually in underwriting and mortgage underwriting and processing, and I was also a mortgage loan officer. So you're ingrained from as soon as you start the job of like what's allowed and what's not allowed, and it's just it's a conversation that needs to be had, and it's a slow education process, but it's possible, and it's more possible if you do it with your local banks than it is with the big banks. That's going to be a lot harder to change.
Mhm.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
So, a couple more questions here. So, when you started your company, one of the things that we're trying to also communicate here in this podcast is for small entrepreneur, you know, aspiring builders, architects, designers who want to try to go into this field. How did you start? Did you have to get a loan for your business? Did you do a crowdfunding? Did you do any kind of capital raise for your company?
Yeah, I started this thing with zero money, and I just kept working at it. And I had any, like, there was a project I didn't even have enough money for gas to get there, you know. So I started at totally $0 and just, talked to enough people with enough heart that saw enough potential in me and in the business, and to, give me a chance and let me build some things. So I want to thank all those people that gave me a chance early on to do this. But yeah, and I was lucky enough to be able to do this without a loan, and with a living situation that was free enough to not burden me too much with rent and utilities and all of the things that come along with, living a life in American society. So yeah, I'd recommend or encourage anybody trying to make this world a better world through the building industry, just go out there and do it. There's a couple things I do say in my workshops. I do tell people, don't let perfection get in the way of participation. And that's part of just get started. We all start on this timeline of building somewhere. So if you haven't started, then just get out there and do it. Don't let doing it perfectly stop you from doing it at all. You're going to get better at it someday. If you do it enough, you'll get to the perfect point, which is also never going to happen because there is no master. You can always keep learning more. So
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one thing. And then the other one I tell people is start smaller. Whatever you think is small, I'm just going to build a 20 by 20 cabin. That's not small. When you're first starting, 20 by 20 cabin, that's not small. That's too big. So start smaller than that. What's smaller than that? Like one wall, maybe one rammed earth wall, maybe just 6 feet by 6 feet tall. No. That's too big. Start with a bench, even then, like a 4-foot bench by 2 feet tall, it takes a certain amount of know-how and knowledge. So I bring everybody all the way down to start small with a little bonsai size wall. Nice. That's where we start in our rammed earth workshops. Little bonsai goes with your bonsai trees. It helps you promote patience and long-term thinking. And, it gives you a place to start small in a couple hours worth instead of a couple days worth. And then you can grow from there. Do a bonsai size, then do a bench, then do a wall. Then you can put 4 walls up. And then you have to figure out how to do roofs and floors and electrical and all that stuff. Like, that's not close to small, unless you've been working in construction trades your whole life and you've learned all those things already, then you could build a house. But there's a big jump from building a wall to building a house. There's so many things included in between those.
Yeah. I think it's funny is a lot of times I'll get students who'll contact me and they'll be like, okay, yeah, I want to come. I want to take, I know you have a 9 month program. Do you think that's enough for me to be able to go and build my home when I get back home? Like, no, there's a reason why it takes 4 years before you can get your contractor's license under working under somebody who's experienced. And that's because it takes a lot of time and energy. And even then, I think still 4 years, it's still too early. I think it takes it's great if you want to work with somebody that has been doing it for 4 years and learn their system. But even then, and I would start with after 4 years, a 20 by 20 cabin,
Yeah, exactly.
especially if you're doing the designing and you're doing all the electrical plumbing and all that stuff to go with it. So,
Mhm.
well, great. I'm gonna go ahead and get to our final questions here. Let me see if I can get my screen up so I can pull these up. All right, let's start with some questions. What would you, okay, well, we kind of already covered this, but let's see if there's anything else you want to add. But what would you suggest to someone who wants to start a natural building company? So you said start
Mhm.
small, use what you got and just get out there and do it. Is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think work with other people with more experience. And I'm still doing that. I've been doing this 5 years or more, 20 years, but work with somebody with more experience. If that that's where I am with the straw bale buildings that we're doing, and I'm learning as we go, but I'll still work with somebody that has more experience than I am, than I do.
Yeah, I think that's really great. That's some great advice. Um, what does sustainable building mean to you? I know we covered a little bit of this in the beginning, but
Mhm.
what does it actually like? What does it mean to you?
Right. I think sustainable building, and if I take it back a notch or up a notch to sustainability in general, I think it's all about the decisions that you make, the choices that we make. That is this a, and to use some permaculture terminology, is this a regenerative decision? Is this a degenerative decision? And the more regenerative decisions that we're making, meaning that it's going to do more good than harm, or it's going to help. Um, yeah, regenerative. If the building is watering your plants and your plants are providing shade, that's an example of regenerative um,
That's beautiful.
connection to building and landscape. Um, and if you're in a degenerative sense, if your roof is like poisoning, if the roof is poisoning the rainwater that's going off and pouring into the storm sewers, um, maybe that's a degenerative
Mhm.
um, choice. Maybe more like it. Maybe if it's an asphalt um, roof or street that is then pouring down into the rivers and washes and creating a toxic pollution, that's a degenerative solution.
Right.
So in order to get sustainable, um, the more regenerative decisions we make, uh, the closer we'll be to living at harmony. And I think sustainability is part of that. Is part of like living at a balance, living in a balance in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, I think
We're
that's
not
really,
losing. We're not losing anything.
yeah, I think that's beautiful. Really well said. And I'm gonna pause these questions real quick because I want to ask you a little bit about the permaculture. I know that on your website you talk about how you use permaculture as part of your design. For the audience, first of all, let's just like, who those who don't know what permaculture is, let's just get a little small description of permaculture and then tell us how you use that as part of your design in your homes.
Right. Okay. So yeah, permaculture, and I'll try to explain this. I'll try to define this. It's basically a philosophy and mindset of using nature as a guide to our kind of human efforts on the land. Um, if we're using plant material as a building material, that's kind of a permaculture method. Using aquaponics, rainwater harvesting is a permaculture thing, and it's really an ethical and philosophical way to make decisions. I think that's the way I see it. That's the way I've gotten it. Um, you'll see a lot of permaculture in regenerative agriculture. And that's where a lot of the permaculture efforts are being made. So using like lasagna gardens or using wood chip mulch instead of rock mulch, rainwater harvesting off the roof and then into the landscape. These are some permaculture, methods. And yeah, there's ways to take all those methods into the building sector itself. If you work with the permaculture lens, like I do, then you're finding resources that are coming off of your building and able to put those into the building or the landscape to then benefit your building and your life on the building. One principle or philosophy I like to use is the time that we spend on the land should benefit and help enhance the landscape around us. And that's the regenerative idea. Instead of the degenerative ideas, our time on the land is killing the land around us. Yeah, is that thorough enough? I know it's kind of bouncing around a bit.
No, that's beautiful. I think that's great. I mean, just for a simple visualization for the listeners, I mean, it's like looking at a commercial building that's surrounded with parking lots and they have non-local shrubberies as ornamental plants versus, looking at a property that's full of vibrant life, bees flying everywhere, all your walking paths are water permeable, and then seeing what that feels. There's a big difference in the energy feel that you feel when you go into one of those buildings and comparison to one of these other ones that are surrounded with plants and life. So that's for your visualization.
Yeah,
Great.
and you could compare a gas station to a botanical garden in that sense. And there are plenty of other properties that aren't necessarily botanical gardens that will give you some kind of park-like setting in your parking lot instead of a parking lot setting in the parking lot.
Yeah, I always think it's funny, like for the development that we're doing, they are requiring a certain amount of parking spots, and so it's always like I don't understand why parking needs to be part of a development when really we should be promoting less driving in general. There should be more bike paths, and money could be spent better utilizing less gas. So I think it's just so we're doing all of we're not using any we're using pavers and we're using water permeable for our whole parking lot for everything. So that's the kind of thought that we had. We're like, yeah, well, it's fine. You're going to make us put a parking lot, but it's going to look like a park. So
right. Yeah, exactly. And I think there are people in the zoning and planning industries that are challenging those rules, those parking requirement rules. And I know somebody that works in zoning in City of Tucson, and they were actually at the mall during Black Friday counting how many parking spaces were empty. And I think after this year of COVID and the online sales increasing, it's really going to change the landscape of the parking lot because they're all sized for those big days like Black Friday, Christmas shopping. And the rest of the year, it's just putting petrochemicals in the waterways.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And just taking up space that could be used for trees and plants and for the bees.
exactly.
Well, great. So let's see a couple more questions. What does natural living mean to you? I know you've covered a lot of that in your conversation, but what does those words, natural living, mean to you?
Right. And yeah, and before I answer that, I just encourage anybody listening to this to take a permaculture design certification course. Take one. It might be offered in your area. There's some in California. There's one here in Tucson. There's some online and in person. But yeah, look those up. Permaculture changed my life when I took that course, and it really changed the way I look at things. So I can't speak highly enough about permaculture itself.
For sure.
And if you're already interested in natural building, they go hand in hand. Natural building really is a permaculture effort. If you know it or not, it really is. Okay, so yeah, what does natural living mean? And I think it's along the same lines as what are sustainable building materials and what sustainable building means, but it's really trying to live in, or not even trying, living in harmony with the natural environment, and not being a human in a natural world, but being, not that there's a separation. There's a lot of talk about humans being separate from nature, in the way that we've developed our own society, but natural living brings us closer to our wild selves in a way that connects us to nature and the wildlife and the plants, and you know the sun and the moon, and all those things that are really natural about the world that aren't human constructed. And natural living really is bringing us closer to those things. Um, so those materials that we choose, if they're more natural, earth and straw and wood, then just being around them connects us to that natural world. And if we plant with native habitat, then it provides habitat for wild animals and the natural animals that live here, not just the pigeons and the squirrels, but the lizards and the bobcats and wild birds and hawks, and all the things that live in rural areas. They can live in the urban setting also, if we live in a more natural way, if we build our houses more naturally and do our landscapes more naturally, provide for habitat as well as for humans as well as animals.
Yeah, I think it's also really cool that the way we started building was because we started to mimic how the animals sheltered themselves, right? I mean, when we left the caves, we're like, oh wait, look how they can use this mud to build a little hut for themselves. Let's do that. That works.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
And
Well said.
I still do that. I do watch nature and take inspiration from what animals are doing. And ants are a real place that I found a lot of inspiration in. They're always building out of dirt. They dig a hole and they mound it up, and they'll even do some passive solar action. I've seen ants do passive solar stuff with the way that they mound the earth up. It's really interesting.
That's really cool. So those of you who are listening, next time check out some ants. Stick around, see how they build, see how they use passive solar design. I'm definitely going to do that. All right, let's a couple more questions. What do you feel is the best way to fund natural buildings, alternative building companies, basically sustainable companies that are trying to make their way into the world with no capital? Like, what do you think? How can we help fund these companies as just everyday people?
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. Um, the money part is definitely the hard part, and I want to bring this up since you've used this term a couple times, alternative building methods, and and for me, and I'm doing this anytime anybody brings that up now, is that I think we really need to change the language there, like you were talking about changing the language of straw bales. Um, that we really need to change the language of alternative building methods to, I'm using essential building methods, because these methods are really the ones that are going to help us decarbonize the building industry, and which is really important for our climate change action and initiatives. If we're going to do this, if we're going to continue building, yeah, it's essential that we bring our carbon loads down of our building materials, and these are the materials that are essential to do that. So I encourage everybody listening to start using essential building materials instead of alternative.
Yeah, I like that. I love that. Essential. I'm gonna try to do that as well.
Right? Or find your own way to make that term, you know, work for you. But
Hmm.
essential is the one I've found.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so yeah,
going back to
talking about
yeah, how do we capitalize? How do we bring uh everyday people to help us, build these structures for them? How can we?
mhm.
What do you? I mean, from your experience, what do you think that would be a good way to do it? Have you done any research on crowdfunding or
I think there's some
alternative?
really interesting, yeah, there's some interesting crowdfunding. There's a lot of really interesting and new things happening in banking right now, where people are trying to figure out how to make banking more sustainable and how to fund these sustainability projects. And there's some, yeah, like low risk loans that, and I'm not very well versed in the whole financial world, but a few people that I've been working with recently are, and there's some community-based loans that have, um, ways to buy in at a really low margin or a low investment that then you can buy or you can pull money out and use for your project. Um, there's a program in Tucson called Scale Up that a friend of mine, Mike Peel, started, and Local First Arizona has taken on as their child. And they're using some state funding and some other personal funding to create a revolving loan fund.
That's
That
awesome.
as your project, your project can buy into this loan fund or apply to this loan fund. And you can do your project, and some of the agreement is some of the savings that you've made through energy retrofits go back into the loan fund, or that's a way for you to pay back your loan in a certain amount of time. And then after that time's up, then you're able to start reaping the benefits. I think that's a really interesting way to go.
Yeah, I like that. I'm definitely gonna write that down and see if I can talk to your friend and see if he wants to come on the show and explain a little bit how people can set up those funds within their own little city, their own little town.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the building part is the easy part. The funding part is the really difficult part. If you're paying cash, no problem, but if you need a loan, and like we said, the banks are hesitant to loan on these kind of buildings, which still doesn't make sense to me. But one project we're doing, and you talked about you're doing some developments, and that's a direction I'm headed in. And we have a project that might be 70 houses
Nice.
that we're working towards. But the bankers we've been talking to there say, if you can show us one comp from anywhere in the country, we'll loan on it. And then
Nice.
it's just difficult to find that comp.
Hmm.
But if we build one cash, then we have a comp, and we could then they'll loan, just like you're saying, they'll refinance if you build one.
Right.
But it's still I still don't get it, because I've been doing this for 20 years and it's been going on for a lot longer than I've been here.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
the hesitation?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because like in my area, a lot of the people who are building natural buildings and tribal buildings and these kind of alternative or essential buildings, I they don't want to sell them. they're not going on the market. So you can't use them as comp. So even if an appraiser comes in and sees a finished product, they can't comp it because it's like, well, I can only comp it to, let's say, per square foot, per bedroom, per bathroom, similar size, building, but I can't comp it to in comparison to other natural buildings or other alternative buildings because there isn't any really on the market. And if they do go on the market, it's sold between friends, or it's never really listed. So it's not recorded, or it's, especially in our area where there's a lot of growers, a lot of it's cash, so they don't want to say they paid 400 $500,000 for a house when they have to pay taxes on that. So they say, oh, I paid 250 for it, so it's not really helping the comp situation in that sense. But yeah, it's a definitely, that's why we are getting into developments. It's just because we're kind of tired of playing that game. We just feel like it's time for us to do it ourselves, put our money, put our energy towards that goal, because we do feel like it's time for other people to be able to live in these beautiful homes, and it's time to show the investors and the banks that this is a viable option. Not only can you make money off the investment, and not only will you have a line out the wall or around the block for people who want to rent these places, but you can also do good with your money, so it's a triple bottom line situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I am looking for people with money with that kind of attitude, or willing to get into it with us
Mhm.
here in Tucson as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we should keep in touch for sure. And then when you're kind of I can share a little bit of my progress of what I've done and how we're doing it. And, we can work together and helping each other with this process and help bring new developments, new real estate developments into the world that investors can look at as a way of, this is maybe the future, especially, with permaculture gardens all around all those properties, sustainability,
Yeah, exactly.
food, you know, food security,
Right.
you know.
Hmm.
Well, great. I appreciate your time. Our time is up, but I, think we learned a lot, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I'm super excited to continue to follow you. And hopefully, you'll come back on the show, and we'll kind of keep going in our progression. Is there anything that we can do, or do you want to share how people can get a hold of you, how they can find out about your programs, your workshops, your volunteer options?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm invite anybody listening to follow us on Instagram. Natural Building Works on Instagram is where we show a lot of our current projects and processes going on. Um, and at naturalbuildingworks.com, we post all of our volunteer and workshop dates. And there are 2 projects going on right now. The Cole's Cabin in Elfrida, Arizona is a straw bale full build volunteer and learn program that's going on right now through the month of January. So you can sign up there. And we also have a rammed earth project going on in Tucson. And that one, just that the dates have been moving for that. But go to naturalbuildingworks.com and sign up for the dates that are available. Should be February now for that project. And I think the rest of the year, we're going to have a lot of projects coming online, a lot of opportunities to learn rammed earth, straw bale, plasters, earthen floors, all those things in the natural building world.
Nice, and that's great. And is there an email that the people can reach out to you if they have any questions?
Yeah, I think going through the website, naturalbuildingworks.com, there's a portal there that you can send messages through that is easier to track than an email address for me. So I
Yeah,
appreciate any messages come through there.
perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us again, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Pablo.
Thank you for listening to the Natural Living Development Podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Please help spread the word by sharing this podcast with your friends on social media, leaving us a review, and subscribing to the show. For more information about our natural living developments, please visit naturallivingdevelopment.com. If you want to learn more about natural building, join our intern or apprenticeship program, or if you're interested in building a natural building for your family, please visit naturallivingschool.com. See you next show.